So anyhow, Sherri comes along, and she likes boys as well as girls. So when little kindergartner friends, a time or two, got invited home to play, it was a little boy. And they were so rough, I said, no, I can't go through this. Invite the girls. And so she did. So Sherri was a cute little kindergartner with a Marie Osmond haircut, you know, and as she grew up, she loved Michael Jackson. And her room, all one wall of her room, you couldn't see any of the paint or the wallpaper. It was all Michael Jackson stuff. And he was her favorite as she grew up. But she had her good friends in the church, and they became her school friends by and large. She had a few little problems growing up, but she had a mother that said, just suck it up and go forward, because many times at school it would be a church threesome. And boys never seem to mind if there's a threesome, but girls, it's always two together and one on the outs. And very often Sherri was the one on the outs. Clear up into junior high school, and Dad would want me to go talk to the mothers. And I said, Judah, can't do that. You have to let them make their own way. The mothers can't demand that their daughters have this friend or that friend. And so she would vacillate between friends. But she got through grade school fine, and she got into junior high school, and her best friend in junior high school was Aaron McIntyre, who was a member of the church. And they were best friends to the point that one time they were going to buy necklaces that said best friends forever, and they were matching necklaces. And they both started to become friends with another girl at school who was not a member of the church. And the first thing Sherri knew, Aaron and this other girl had gone to the store and bought the matching necklaces for themselves. She came home so brokenhearted, and Dad said, go talk to Sue. And I said, no. I said to Sherri, you are a lovely girl. You are well liked. You have lots of friends. You just go back to that junior high and make new friends that don't include Erin and her friend. Don't you let that break your heart. And she did. And she survived very well. But she then, as David left the band as a 9th grader, Sherri came into the band as a 7th grader. And the band director through all those years was Art Farr. And he played the trumpet. He actually played with the group that became the Tijuana Brass and was a trumpet for some time, but separated himself from that. But he was a quality musician and a great junior high school band director. Eventually he went on to the high school with some of the kids. But he had a son the same age as Sherri. Now I'll mix up the name because I want to say Steve, and that's the dad's name, I think. But anyhow, whatever his name was.
That was Art Farr.
Oh, Art Farr, and the son was Steve Farr. And he liked Sherri in grade school, and he used to give her at Valentine's time a special Valentine or a little stuffed animal. He wasn't out of the way, but he adored Sherri, and she got along well with boys. And all through junior high school, Steve, they were too young to date, but he was a very constant friend of Sherri's. And if I can jump ahead just to keep this Steve Farr thing going, he followed the path of his father, and he plays in groups and is very musical and is never married. And Sherri went just a couple of years ago, I think, back to an Arcadia High School class reunion, and Steve was there, and he brought memorabilia that he had kept all the years that he liked Sherri, and showed her and gave her back some of those things. Did you remember this, and did you remember that? And she's married with children, but he still looked upon her very fondly. in an appropriate way. So Sherri got through junior high school fine. She played Little League softball and became a star pitcher. Did I cover that earlier? Yep. I covered that. So she played sports in junior high and loved them. So she was a good combination of her mom and her dad. Dad was musical too, so I can't take all the credit for the music in our family. But music was my first love, and band had been my love. And the kids all were in band, but they enjoyed sports. And Sherri loved sports, first as a participant, and later she is such a BYU fan that some in her family have laughingly counseled her she should go back to school and get a second degree in statistics and be a football team statistician because she has a memory that doesn't quit. But Sherri went from junior high, had a happy, happy junior high, with the exception of having to learn to make her own friends. One thing, people loved Sherri, and I got tired of her in junior high bringing her gym clothes home to be washed, which was a requirement, every Friday, and getting them back to school on Monday. And she would get to school and call me and say, "Mother, will you bring my gym clothes? If you don't, I get a mark down." And so I did this a few times, and I said, "No, I'm not going to do this anymore. You either take your clothes to school or you suffer the consequence. I am finished. Don't call me again." So, not too long after I said that, she forgot her gym clothes. She believed me. She did not call me. She went to the school nurse. At the time they had a full-time school nurse. She went to the school nurse's office and said, whatever her name was, "I don't know what to do because I've left my gym clothes at home and my mother will not bring them to me." The school nurse said, "Come with me," took her out, put her in her car, drove her home. She went in the house while I was there and got the gym clothes, and the nurse took her back. And I said, "Sherri has a way with people. They love her, and I can't win for losing." I tried to teach her a lesson and be firm about it, and somebody else stepped in front of me and probably were thinking to themselves, what an awful uncaring mother that is, that she won't help that daughter. So as all the kids grew up.
It's similar vein, talk about the cookies in the neighborhood.
When Sherri was in Girl Scouts or Bluebirds, I think she was a Girl Scout. Is that what you're talking about? Well, I'll talk about this and then I'll go back to that. But when it came time to sell Girl Scout cookies, Sherri was driven to be the one that sold the most. And she would come home and she would canvass the neighborhood. Everybody would buy Girl Scout cookies from her. She would get on the phone and canvass the ward. And a good lot of people in the ward bought cookies from her, to the point that I said, as my life got older, I will never turn a child away who comes to my door selling Girl Scout cookies, because I will remember how lovingly people supported Sherri when she sold her Girl Scout cookies. Now Reed was mentioning something else. We had it was a long cul-de-sac, and up at near the end of the cul-de-sac there was a man who drove a truck that delivered cookies to different grocery stores. That was his business. And she would just go, she wasn't the only one in the neighborhood, but the kids could go up and knock on his door and probably say, "We don't have any cookies at our house." But he always gave them cookies. He knew why they were there, and he always gave them the cookies. And I had a neighbor when Sherri was little, that non-member but a sweet neighbor, and Sherri would knock on that door and say, "We don't have any candy at our house." And the neighbor learned that that's when Sherri came. This is preschool, and she always kept candy in her house and always gave candy. And on Halloween, when she went with the group of neighborhood kids, they always had a special sack of candy for Sherri. And still, while she was a little girl, we had a neighbor not straight across the street from the Griffiths, but one house next to it, so a little catty-cornered. And they were an older couple. They reared 2 grandsons that lived in that home, but they went to a military school. So we never had much involvement with that family. But the kids, since it was a cul-de-sac, nobody usually on the street unless they lived there, the kids would play ball out in the street. And when they tried not to get a ball onto the Hall's lawn, but if they would, Mrs. Hall would come out, and they were not allowed on her property to pick up the ball, and she would take the ball in her house and keep it. Well, the silver lining to that was always that Mr. Hall would wait a day or two, retrieve the ball, and return it to the kids. So they didn't suffer. But I always tried to teach the kids that's her property, that's her choice, and we must respect that. So you always treat that family with respect. You do not go and yell bad things out in front of their house or in any way show disrespect. And the kids were very good. They never did. But by the time Sherri came along, and David and Julie had gone on to other things, and they were in school, and Sherri was home alone, and I would lose Sherri. She could get out and disappear, and we always left the garage door open so the cat could come and go. And then she would come home, and I'd say, "Where have you been, Sherri?" "I've been over visiting Mr. and Mrs. Hall." And they gave me this little trinket or this little picture or this little something or other and said I could have it and bring it home. And I said, "Oh, Sherri, they don't like children very well. They don't want to be bothered. Please don't go there anymore." And Sherri would disobey me, and she would go back and visit her friends. And she would sing them her primary song she could sing when she was 3 years old and carry a tune. And Mrs. Hall found out. I think I went over to apologize to her one time and said, "I'm so sorry that she comes. I'll try to make sure she doesn't." She said, "Don't you ever stop that child from coming over. We love her." So Sherri, in her cute little way, broke down the barriers between kids and the Halls, because she would go with them, and to the point that I didn't know what to do. Any little picture or trinket or whatever that they had they didn't want anymore, they gave to Sherri. And so I started saying, that would go nicely out in your playhouse. But she made great friends with the Halls, and they loved her. And this sweet little girl that didn't know they didn't like children, didn't know they didn't want children in their home, and she's looking around the neighborhood for somebody that she can go visit. She never went off our street because we were part way up the street, and she never went that end. She went toward the cul-de-sac end, so I didn't worry about her too much as she made her little friendships and visited with adults that were still home and would invite her in and give her cookies or candy or trinkets or whatever. And that was how Sherri treated our neighborhood and was accepted and loved by all the people that lived on that street. Some more than others, but that was Sherri. And if I get her through grade school, I always tried to be the room mother, because I didn't really like PTA well enough to be an officer, but I wanted to be involved where my children could be involved. So I tried to be a room mother to all of our children, so that I was the one that was bringing treats on holidays or preceding holidays or whatever, and doing things that the kids could see I was involved in enjoying it. So anyhow, back to Sherri. We got her through grade school, we got her through junior high school. There were probably fun things she did, but none of them come to my mind right now. Well, I do too. She sang in a program in junior high. They had some sort of a program, and she sang a duet with another girl who later became a chanteur too, and they sang a beautiful duet for some program that they had at school. And when she went to high school, you had to register by a certain time they gave you, and hers was a late time. And they wanted your parent to come with you as a sophomore. So she and I went to the school, and she was supposed to take a science class, and the science classes were all filled except for an AP class.
Accelerated or AP, yeah.
AP class in biology, and I thought, oh, you're the little sister of the girl that everybody loved so much, that the teacher loved so much when Julie took biology, that he wanted her to be his assistant. And so since we were the Gunnells and had a good reputation, they let her, as I was counseling her, to take this biology class. It can't be that hard. Your Julie, Sister Julie excelled in it. You'll do fine. You're as smart as Julie is. And Sherri's idea of studying at that point in life is you read through it once, and that's it. And usually she could get by with that, and she understood it. She was good at math, and she was good at everything else. But she could read through that biology once, and she didn't understand it. And I said, Sherri, then you read it through a second time, or a third time, or a fourth time, and pretty soon the understanding will come. She struggled through that whole year of biology and blamed me the whole year for getting her in that class that she didn't want and didn't belong. According to her, she didn't belong in that class. But because we were Gunnells, and everybody at that school knew Reed and Karen and Julie and David, so when Sherri came along, they thought, she's just a chip off the old block. And she was a good student, and she did well, but she did horribly in biology. It was not her thing, and she did not believe her mother, who said, if you don't understand it once, read it twice. If you don't understand it twice, keep reading, and pretty soon the lights will come on and you'll understand it. So that was one thing. But Sherri had one privilege that none of the other kids enjoyed. David could never take a car to school. Reed and Karen couldn't, because we didn't have a car to spare for them, and kids tended not to take cars to school anyhow as much when they were in school. But Julie was fine with no car at school. She got along fine, riding with her friends or such. And David probably would have liked to, but clear until he was a senior in high school, I would pick him up after school and give him and his girlfriend a ride home, or else her mother would pick them up and give both of them a ride home from school. Because we had 2 cars, but I was Relief Society president, and I said, David, I would love to share my car with you, but as surely as I do, I will have a reason as Relief Society president that I will need that car for some reason. And so he never had the luxury of taking a car. At the time Sherri was in high school, her junior and senior years, Mom was no longer the Relief Society president. Mom was sitting home in her spare time typing theses. Mom didn't need the car, and Sherri took over the pickup that's when Dad let her with the stick shift. She drove that pickup to and from school, especially her senior year, that none of the other kids ever had that privilege of doing. David, near the end of his school, did have his motorcycle. He had bought a motorcycle against the wishes of his mother and dad, but he was responsible with it, and he actually bought it without our knowledge because he was afraid we wouldn't let him have it, and he found a good buy, and he started over in LaSance's backyard. That was one of our neighbors on the street. When we found out about it, we said, "You bring that home." And we talked it over with him and decided we would let him keep it. We were not harsh parents. I think we were, I don't know, they all turned out well, so I think we did well by them, but we expected them, as Joseph Smith said, teach them correct principles and let them govern themselves, was sort of our motto with the things they did. So, but anyhow, Sherri had a pickup truck. Sometimes if Dad wanted to take the pickup, she ended up with our Oldsmobile, but she had access to a car all through school. She became the first girl president of Sean Tours. They'd always had boys as president, and they voted her in, and Mr. Maxim wouldn't deny it to her because the students had voted her in. So she, and I think David was the president of Sean Tours too, his senior year. But she was very, very involved with Sean Tours, and they had a year where they won everything, never took a second place. And it was a beautiful experience. And she had some solos with the Sean Tours. And so that was her life and her love. We had one bad experience. I don't know if I should share this with her, so if she had want it shared, you can cut it out. But she had a boy from Temple City Ward that she liked. She liked him when she was too young to date, so they kind of did things as a group. She and Mindy and this boy and another boy from Temple City, and we let him do a few group activities where there was the forum together, and we knew what they were going to be doing. But he became wayward and got into things he shouldn't, and was actually in a facility to overcome a drug habit. And Sherri wanted to know if she could go visit him while he was in that facility, and I said, only as a friend. You know, I didn't mind her being kind to him. But then when he got out, and she wanted him to be able to come and see some of the chanteur activities, and we let him come with us as a friend to see her compete, and he had to leave and go out to smoke in the middle of the performance. And when he came back and was sitting by me, I knew what he had done. I could smell it. And I said to Sherri, I'm not ready for you to pursue this friendship. She said, well, I know he smokes, but the counselor has said that's to help him, you know, stay off drugs. It's a good substitute. And I said, not in my mind, not with my daughter. And so I said, that's it. You know, I'd rather you find other friends. And I found out that he was coming to the high school and seeing Sherri after school and with her chanteur's friends. And he had bought a necklace and given it to her and had invited her to Sherri's prom. And when I found out about that, I about went through the roof. And I said, no way. You give the necklace back. I told you he could be a friend, but only within a group of a lot of friends. He can't be a special friend. and he cannot be a prom date. And he cannot come on his motorcycle and take you motorcycling without my permission. And she cried and she begged, and she wouldn't get to go to the prom now because nobody would ask her. And I said, that's too bad. If nobody asks you, you stay home from the prom. But you do not go with him. You cannot be his special friend. You cannot associate with him, because I didn't want her to be tempted. Maybe that was harsh, but she was my daughter, and that was the decision I made, and Dad stood behind me. And she got a date to the prom. I think that was her senior year. A boy in Chantours, member of the church, who was actually a junior, but she liked him, and he was her date for the prom. And he knew the history of this other boy, and he came forward because he liked her too, and asked her to the prom, and they had a great, great time, except he left his good shoes. Darren left his good shoes, dress shoes, at school because they were also his Chantour shoes, the black good ones. And he came to pick up Sherri for the prom, and he was in his tux, and he had on some shoes that didn't look even halfway acceptable. We went to the closet and dug out David's shoes, and they didn't fit Darren exactly, but we got him through the prom with shoes that wouldn't be embarrassing to him or to Sherri. I don't think Sherri was embarrassed by it anyhow, but that was her date through the prom, was to Darren. And she dated a boy, a non-member boy in high school, actually went to the prom as a sophomore when she wasn't quite 16, but Mindy was 16 and Mindy could go, and most of her other friends could go, and her birthday was August. And so Dad and I let down the bar a little bit and thought, does she need to be punished because she's a late birthday? And I made her the dress, and she went to the prom with Scott Barnard and this non-member boy that was just as squeaky clean as you could ever find. And she doubled with Mindy and whoever Mindy went with, and so it wasn't a long date. But she dated Scott, and he was over to our house. He would come over on a Sunday and spend the evening, and he and Sherri and I would sit at the kitchen table together and play games. So he was very comfortable with our family and very respectful of Sherri. But they kind of broke up before she went to BYU, and she had a BYU boyfriend, but she and Scott still always stayed in touch. And when she came home, they started seeing each other again, and I kept saying to her, send the missionaries to him. But she said, you don't understand, Mom. In her mind, she had evaluated him and felt like if he ever joined the church, it would be for the wrong reasons. And so she didn't ever give him a chance. But she quit dating him. And then she dated a returned missionary all her freshman year, and he was just a fun boy to date. And she came home and she started dating Darren again because he was still home. He hadn't gone to BYU yet, and Scott was in the picture sometimes, you know, just kind of friendly. And the end of the summer, this boy, and I can't think of his name, I don't want to remember it, came down to Arcadia to see Sherri during the summer, and he invited her to Disneyland. And when he got her to Disneyland, he set her down and brought out an engagement ring and proposed to her. And Sherri came home and she said, Mom, I was so shocked, I had a hard time to keep from laughing. And so she turned him down. But Sherri was one that never wanted to give up a friendship. So she went back to BYU as a sophomore, and this boy would still come over as a friend and see her. And I said, you can't do that. You have to make a complete break with this boy, because as long as you let your friendship continue and let him still have things to do with you, he keeps his hope alive, and he's in love with you. And so she took my advice and broke up the relationship. And sadly, for the wife he married in time, and he told his wife, which was a dumb thing, he told her about Sherri and said, you remind me a lot of Sherri. Now, how is a new wife going to feel about being compared? And he likes you because somehow you remind him of his first love. And Sherri has seen him over the years, but never, was wise enough to remember what I told her. Don't do things that will keep hope alive. Sherri overdid as a sophomore. Her best friend, her freshman year, was in band too. Melanie, can't remember her name. And she was from Salmon, Idaho, and they did not have very much money. So she had to find the most affordable rent. And so Glenwood Apartments has been remodeled, and they're pretty nice now. But Glenwood was not where you wanted to be, at least I didn't think so. 4 girls to a room, crowding in, but it was affordable, so she went there with Melanie and 2 other roommates. So there were 4 of them in this room that was smaller than the rooms in Riviera that just kept 2 girls. And Sherri loved people, and she loved doing things, and she loved to be the center of things. So I think she did too much playing with her girlfriends with so many roommates. And she got mononucleosis. Then she got Epstein-Barr, or chronic fatigue, and she ended up having to come home. And so she came home for quite a while until she could get feeling better, because she couldn't handle school at BYU because she wasn't well enough. So she came home for a while and just got a job, and then when we could see she was going to be home for a while, she went to Azusa, one of the junior colleges out east. She actually went to school there, and Julie counseled us, before she signs up for one, you check it with BYU and you get it in writing that BYU will accept their version of whatever the class was that was a requirement at BYU. I don't remember which classes she took. And she wisely did that, and it was true. When in time she went back to BYU, they were not going to accept that class to fulfill the requirements until she had the written statement from BYU that said they would accept it. So she came home for a while and went to school at junior college and worked, and finally worked her way back that she could go to school. But she fought that chronic fatigue through all the rest of her school year at BYU. She stayed at one point in Carriage Cove, which was a more expensive apartment. Julie had stayed there for a time, but you had your own bedroom, and you didn't have to share a bedroom with anybody. And so Sherri wanted that so she could sleep when she wanted to, or what, and not deal with roommates. And so her roommate, her freshman year, was Jill Johnson from West Arcadia Ward. They were great friends. But Jill fell in love with David's roommate, Darren Hymas, and ended up marrying him. So she got tied up with these other friends. maybe that was her sophomore year. I don't remember, but she was with Jill one year, and that didn't work out well because all of David's roommates loved her, but they loved her as the little sister. Nobody would date her. But she got through BYU. She changed her major. She'd been a music major. She actually composed for one of her classes, probably in composition. It was a song, it doesn't come to mind now, but it was about the prophet. Oh, he has sent a prophet in his place. It was about the Savior couldn't be there all the time, and so he sent a prophet in his place. It's a beautiful song, and her professor encouraged her to enter it in the New Era Song Competition, and it won honorable mention. But she had to sign over the rights to the song to BYU. And I've said to her she should, after all these years, she should get in touch with BYU and see if they will release the copyright of that back to her and do something with it. But it's a beautiful, beautiful song. She composed a song that she gave me as her mother. And she presented it to me when she was in the singles ward at Arcadia, and she invited me because she was speaking, and so I came to that ward to hear her speak. And then she spoke a little bit, and then she went over to the piano, and the mic was there, and she played and sang this song that to me is very beautiful. About me as her mother, the things she liked about me as her mother. And so, have I gotten her through high school and through BYU? Both Julie and Sherri marched in the Cougar Marching Band. And that was a great experience. Now, they have scholarships, and you get half tuition for playing in that Cougar Marching Band, but those girls did it just out of the love of band and the love of BYU, and the experience of being in the BYU band together. But I'm trying to think, as I say, Sherri struggled through BYU in many ways because she ruined her health, I think, in loving her friends and her fun activities, her social life more than she did buckling down and being a good student at school. And I hope that doesn't offend her, but I think it's kind of, she might dispute that, but at any rate she was sick and she had to come home part of the time and go to school elsewhere, and finally well enough that she could come back and finish out at BYU. She changed from her music major to a family sciences, specializing in early childhood education. So it's a wonderful degree that has served her so well as a mother. She learned much about mothering little kids, and so I don't begrudge her that degree. It was the fastest thing that she could get through so she could graduate, that she could manage with her health problems.
Tracy?
And then she came back, after she graduated, she came back to Arcadia because we still lived there. And she was very involved in the young adults, and she was asked to be the, well, she was the representative of their young adult ward on the State High Council. And finally, at one point, before they finally dissolved that young adult, the two that were the interfacers for that ward and the stake was a boy, Holmes boy, Eric Holmes and Sherri. So, and she would write the road shows for them. They won that young adult ward when Sherri was there and did a takeoff on Greece, maybe, to change all the words to the songs and everything and make that their road show. And it won the top award as a road show, and Sherri won the award as director of it. So she shared her talents. And if I went back to David, when he was a young adult at home, post-mission, he was in the young adult road shows and sang the solos, you know, had the big lead. So the kids loved their road show experiences. The younger ones, even as young adults, they were still doing road shows in, by then, Arcadia Stake. Arcadia had been a new stake formed from Pasadena Stake, and so they were in Arcadia Stake. But when President Merkley, following the council of the church, when they said they wanted the young adult wards to be dissolved and those people to be brought back into their regular wards, he went forward with it. A lot of young adult wards dragged their feet, and the church changed their mind on it. So some of the wards never had to go through that dissolution. But Sherri and Eric were the main ones in charge there. And they wrote, and I think it was mostly Sherri, they had a funeral for that young adult ward. And they had the casket, and they had the pallbearers, and they had the pickup truck that drove it around the parking lot. I can't remember all the details, but it was hilariously funny and good, and served a good purpose because they could laugh instead of cry that they were being dissolved as a young adult ward. But that was the type of thing that Sherri did, and it's the type of thing she does in her ward and stake here as a married. But when we moved to Utah, we wanted Sherri to come with us. David had said he was still in school or doing his things. He didn't want to, he came home and stayed long enough to get his tonsils out. He and Sherri had them out at the same time and were both so sick. It's hard, I've been told, the hardest time to have the most pain an adult can have is having their tonsils out as an adult. And it was true, Sherri had hers done first, and David mocked her because she was so miserable. And then David had his out, and he came back and he'd say, "Sherri, I'm so sorry I mocked you," because he knew how much she hurt and how hard a surgery it was for them. But anyhow, one thing that Sherri and Julie had fun with, not David at BYU because he didn't go out for the band at BYU, but when the BYU band would get to go to the bowl games that BYU was playing, and they had those fun experiences with the band of going to Atlanta, Georgia, or I don't remember all the places they went to, but they went as members of the band. So I throw that out. But Sherri did not want to come back to Utah. She loved her involvement with young adults, and they still had a lot of activities even though they didn't have a ward. And they interfaced with the young adults in the Pasadena stake, because they were Arcadia stake. And somebody said to her at one point, "There's somebody in Pasadena stake that I'd like to introduce you to and get you together with, because I think you two would be good for each other. And it was Tracy. So one of her friends.
So she stayed in California when you
She
moved
stayed
up there.
in California. We really didn't want her to stay there, and we had sold the home, so what's she gonna do? You get an apartment with a girlfriend. So there was a young single that was older than Sherri, Terry Nielsen, I can't remember her name for sure. She was such, she'd been on a mission, she was a nurse, she had been in the Stake Relief Society presidency as a counselor. She was quite mature and a number of years older than Sherri. And so we went to Terry, I did, and said she had her own home and she lived in it alone at the time, down in what would have been Temple City Ward. And I said, we're moving to Utah and we feel uneasy about leaving Sherri here. Is there any reason or any chance that you would like a roommate, that would you like Sherri's roommate? She said, no, I've gone the roommate route and I really don't like it. But I'll tell you what, I'll let her come live with me until she can find a good situation for another roommate. So she moved in with Terry, and she stayed, and she stayed, and finally Terry was gone someplace for a weekend, and Sherri thought, you know, am I wearing out my welcome? So she got together with another young single adult, and they actually went out looking for apartments. They didn't find one, but when Terry came back, Sherri said, you know, I've decided, according to our agreement, it's about time I move out and find an apartment. And Terry said, we need to sit down and have a talk. She loved Sherri. She did not want Sherri to move out. And so she gave Sherri the green light, and Sherri stayed with her. And Terry was maybe 40, 41 by the time she got married, and Sherri was 28. So, you know, there was some difference in their age. But Tracy and Sherri got engaged, and Tracy was 30 and Sherri was 28. Neither one of them ever been married, but you know, just took a while to find the right one. And Kenny Hatch, we loved the Hatch family, Paul Hatch family. He was kind of a middle son of theirs. He had married a beautiful girl, and he was actually in the stake presidency that followed the Merkley, Gunnell, Heslop presidency. And his wife died of liver cancer and left, I think 5, it could have been 6, but at least 5 boys, no girls. You know, from teenagers ranging down to young. And Kenny, not Kenny, that's the other brother. Who did I say? Kenny was the little brother. I said his name, but anyhow, he was a member of the stake presidency, and he, looking to remarry, he decided Terry was worth looking at, but he didn't want anybody to know, because maybe he was Kenny. Anyhow, he dated, so the only one that knew in the stake, probably, unless maybe a member of the stake presidency, some man that he could be a confidant to, was Sherri, because he would come to the house, pick up Terry, bring her home, but Sherri was sworn to secrecy, and she never shared that with anybody. And he would go outside the stake to take her to dinner, or to movies, or whatever they did, because he didn't want it to be a subject of gossip and conjecture. But of course, when he finally decided to marry her, it came out that Kenny Hatch and Terry were going to get married, and Sherri and Tracy were going to get married. They got married within days of each other. Sherri got married first, and then Kenny and Terry. These other single women in the States said, "Who's going to live in that house when you're gone? That's a magic house. Can we come and live in that house?" Look what happened to those two that were, you know, a little older. Sherri, for young one, was a little older, and Terry a little more mature. And she had gotten to the point that she had told me one time that she felt like that she would probably, when she got married, would raise somebody else's children. So those two got married just such a short time apart. And of course, by the time Sherri got married, and here she marries a man who was born and raised in American Fork. She has to stay in California to meet him. And she said, "I just knew that I needed to stay in California, and I didn't know why." But they got married, and Tracy worked. He had served his mission in one of the missions in Japan. It might be Sendai, but and he was assistant to the president, who was a Japanese man who was a very successful businessman. And he had told Tracy, you know, after your mission, talk to me if you're looking for a job. But Tracy, I don't, for whatever reason, didn't feel like he should impose that on a mission president who was still in Japan. And so Tracy went to work for another Japanese tour company that they had tour buses, and they gave tours for tourists. And so when they got married, they had one of those tour buses for their wedding, and all the little kids got to ride to and from the temple in the tour bus and sit and watch movies, Disney movies, while the wedding was going on and their parents were in the temple, but they could be there for the things afterwards. So that was Tracy. He was very respectful of Dad and I, and felt a little bit inadequate because he knew Dad was a college professor and had his doctorate, and that we were very well-educated people. And the Rogers are wonderful people, but his dad worked in construction, good construction job as a foreman most of his life, and they were not as well educated as we were. And so the first time when he and Sherri came to Utah, and we met them and we took them out to eat at, which is the all-you-can-eat chicken place.
Golden Girl?
No, the other one. The anyhow, the fried chicken place. We took them there to eat because everybody can find something they like. And Tracy very seriously said, "I need to talk to you." And because he felt that Sherri inadvertently had misrepresented him to our family, because she said he graduated in business with a minor in Japanese, and he said that is not quite accurate. I am close to graduation, but I have not graduated. And he was afraid we would reject him. He didn't know us at the time, and Dad said, "It's not the difference," to the effect, "it's not where you start, it's where you finish. You know, if you got plenty of time to take care of that, and that's fine with us." And that was such a relief to Tracy, because he was so afraid that he wouldn't measure up to our expectations. If you can imagine how we loved that man, that he wouldn't measure up to our expectations for a husband for our daughter. And we did encourage him. They got married when he didn't have his degree, but he got his degree after, and he said, "Now you need to go to you need to walk." And he said, "Oh, I'm not going to walk," because he had no tradition of walking. He said, "No, you have earned that degree. You need to walk the walk now." And, his parents were there, so proud of him. And he has his degree in business. And since they've been married, and Dad, I think Dad was gone by the time Sherri and I encouraged him to get an MBA at BYU. And so he went through the executive MBA program at BYU and has his master's degree in business administration there. And I'm not sure he would have ever thought to try that if it hadn't been for Sherri and I together encouraging him. You can do it. He had an awful time with statistics at one point along the way. When Sherri found out about it, she said, what we do is just hire somebody to be a tutor and to help you through it. And he did, and he got through it fine. But we're proud of Tracy. He's a wonderful, wonderful man, priesthood holder, member of the church, leader in the gospel, and he's making a good life for his family, and he adores Sherri. He recognizes all the beautiful talents and qualities that she has, and he's very supportive in all that she does. And she has served in stake young women presidency and ward young woman president, and wherever she is, they love her, and people come to her. The Relief Society president will come and say, this is what I would like to do for this special program for Relief Society. Can you write the script or work with us on it? This is what I want. Can you do it? The young men's leaders who are still, they have something in American Fork Steak that is like, it's a little bit patterned after EFY, and they call it AFY. It's kind of their version of youth conference. And one of the men has worked with in the EFY program, but when he gets going on that program, Sherri is no longer in Young Women. He comes to Sherri this last year, and Sherri, will you work with me? Will you work with me? Because they know the talents and her willingness. And no matter how busy she is, she never tells anybody no. Sometimes I say, you need to learn to say no. But she doesn't. She shares her talents, and Heavenly Father blesses her for it. And she's rearing 5 beautiful children, is a faithful wife to a good husband. And if I thought about something